Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started with the presentation. I'm Don Moffitt from the Division of Policy and Program Development. Also presenting with me tonight is Donna Cater from the Department of Health, Division of Finance and Rate Setting. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Oh, I'm sorry. And also presenting with me tonight is
Kate Marley from the Waiver Unit.
Lauren Porter, OPWDD Waiver Unit.
Jim Hayward.
Okay. And just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. We're going to be addressing questions at the end. However, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the question and answer box that's available within WebEx. And feel free to send those questions along throughout the presentation. If you are experiencing any connectivity issues, you've been able to join, but you're having any issues actually connecting, please reach out to us again through the chat function that's available within WebEx. Also, if you can't join at all, you can't log in, you can't join, please reach out to us through the People First waiver mailbox. And that address is People First Waiver, all one word, no spaces, lowercase, at opwdd.ny.gov. So again, if you can't join, if you're having issues getting on, please reach out to us that way. And just one final quick point, even though we are scheduled for an hour and a half, we don't think it's going to take the entire time to get through the material. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So, tonight's presentation is to provide you with an overview of the draft 1915C Comprehensive Home and Community-Based Services Waiver Renewal. And so the primary focus of tonight is to kind of, provide that overview, but we also really want to try to do our best to kind of not only make the changes understandable, but also to allow you a little bit of help in kind of finding where those changes are located within the waiver renewal. So it's quite a large document. So, to help whittle down your review is really kind of a goal that we'd like you to walk away from this knowing where the changes are located. So tonight's presentation, the topics are going to include where can I find the waiver, public comment period, just a couple of quick slides on, what is the waiver, what's this renewal all about, as well as an overview of the changes in the renewal. And before we kind of get into all of that presentation stuff, we just want to kind of highlight that this is a renewal. It's essentially kind of continuing on the waiver that we have in place today. It does not mean that anyone is going to have to re-enroll in the waiver. It does not mean that anyone's going to have to fill out, a lot of additional paperwork or anything like that. It's quite simply, an extension of what's already out there, if you will. So it should be seamless to individuals. There should not be any new or additional paperwork to continue being a part of the waiver if you're already enrolled. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about, where can I find this waiver renewal? I mean, here we are talking about a waiver renewal. Well, where do I find it? So there's actually a couple of different places where you can locate the draft 2019 waiver renewal. And one location you can find it is on the OPWD website. So, again, it's quite a large document. It's roughly 500 pages. So if you don't want to print the whole document off, you just want to view it, you can find it on our website at the link that's up on your PowerPoint slide right now. Additionally, if you don't have access to the internet, and some people don't, you can also find hard copies of the document at any of our regional offices. So, you can, reach out to your local regional office. They can put you in touch with, the individual that's kind of the keeper of the document. And certainly you're available to view it. So along with that, attached, please find a list of all the 14 regional offices where a copy of the document is available. So I'm going to leave that up on the screen for an extra couple of seconds in case people are, looking for a particular district or regional office. But that is the actual list of addresses. And again, this is probably a good time to mention that tonight's PowerPoint slide will be posted up on OPWD's website. If not tonight, if it's not already there, it will be up there very, very soon. So, feel free to print off a copy of the PowerPoint. And of course, this information will be available there. So that is how you can, obtain a copy of the waiver renewal application. The next agenda item that we have for tonight is kind of to talk about the public comment period. So essentially, when is the public comment period? Well, the public comment period started this past Monday, September 16th, and it's going to run through October 18th, 2019. So a little over a month, and that is the public comment period. So once we talk about the changes, once you've looked over the document, if you have any comments that you would like to make regarding the document, regarding any of the changes that we're going to talk about, how do you go ahead and submit those comments? Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. So one way that you can send us all your comments is you can reach us by mail. You can mail us here, 44 Holland Avenue, Albany, New York, at the address and the bottom part of your slide. Or, of course, if you don't want to mail things through the mail, you can reach us through the People First Waiver mailbox. And again, that address is also at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so let's just talk kind of briefly about what is the waiver. Well, essentially the waiver is an agreement between the federal government, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS as it's often referred to and abbreviated as. It's an agreement between CMS and New York State. And really what the waiver, it does is it provides New York State with the authority to deliver HCBS waiver services. And in addition to that nature of it as an agreement, it's also a collaborative effort between OPWDD and the New York State Department of Health. So essentially in that relationship, the Department of Health oversees the waiver, OPWDD operates the waiver. So if you want to look at it that way. So with that being said, why are we talking about a waiver renewal at all? Well, our waiver, our comprehensive 1915C waiver, which is the waiver that we're talking about tonight, it's authorized for 5-year periods of time. So our current waiver is set to expire on September 30th, 2019. So we are in the process of renewing that waiver. And again, that's not going to mean any additional paperwork for any individuals that are already enrolled. It should be a seamless process, but it's something that we need to do to continue the waiver. So sometimes you hear about waiver renewal versus waiver amendment. So what's that all about? So in terms of the waiver renewal, again, that's a 5-year period of time that New York State is authorized by the federal government to operate its waiver. But within that 5-year period of time, there's often, that's a long stretch. We live in a very fluid environment. So, periodically changes come around where you have to implement changes, either, for a variety of reasons. Things get updated, things get changed, maybe outdated ways of looking at things. So in those situations, we would be doing an amendment to the waiver. So the renewal is the 5-year period of time that authorizes New York to continue it on. Amendments are periods of time within that 5 years where we may need to make changes for a variety of reasons. So the first amendment would be an Amendment 01, second would be 02, 03, and however many amendments we need to make within that 5-year stretch. Okay, so we're talking about a renewal, and I mentioned a few minutes ago that our current waiver expires on September 30th, yet we're out for public comment until October 18th. How's that going to work? Well, in terms of effective date, we're looking at, we're working on the renewal now. We will shortly be submitting the renewal to CMS. federal government. We're anticipating that we'll have approval by CMS for our waiver renewal by January 1st of 2020. And we're also hoping, and we are under the assumption that that approval will be retroactive to 10/1/2019. So current waiver expires September 30th. We are anticipating that CMS will give us approval for the renewal on October 1st. So we'll be able to, once again, seamlessly continue things on. So that being said, how is the waiver organized? Well, again, one of our goals for tonight is to help people find those changes that we're going to talk about as quickly and easily as possible. So to do that, the next part of the presentation is going to kind of lay out the various pieces of that large 500-page waiver renewal document that we're talking about. So the first section of the application is essentially, it talks about the purpose of the renewal and kind of a review of the application itself, some of the mechanics around it. And that's found on pages 1 through 13 of the document. So in addition to the main section of the application, we have 10 appendices. And they're letter format, A through J. And what those appendices do is they break down large pieces of the document into smaller, more understandable pieces of the document, or easier to follow pieces. So the first appendix that we have is Appendix A, and that covers waiver administration and operation. It's going to kind of lay out some of those shared responsibilities that I mentioned before between Department of Health and OPWD. And that section of the renewal involves pages 13 through 33. So the next appendix in the renewal application is Appendix B. That's going to cover participant access and eligibility. And that essentially covers waiver access and the eligibility processes. And that's going to be found on pages 33 through 57. So moving on, the next appendix that we come to is Appendix C. And Appendix C essentially kind of lays out the criteria and the rules and the guidelines around participant services. So that's where you'll find your service descriptions, any service limits that may be involved, provider qualifications, things of that nature, and those can be found on pages 57 through 157. The next appendix that we're going to find in the renewal application is Appendix D, and that's going to cover participant-centered planning and service delivery. That kind of covers things such as care management, and that appendix is found on pages 157 through 190. For those interested in self-direction or self-directed services, that can be found in the next appendix, which is Appendix E, and that is found on pages 190 through 206 of the renewal application. Okay, so the next appendix we come to is Appendix F, and that focuses primarily on participant rights. It includes things like fair hearings, dispute resolution, things of that nature, and those items can be found on pages 207 through 209. The next appendix that we come to is Appendix G. That essentially covers participant safeguards. That includes things like incident management, restraints, those kinds of items, and that can be found on pages 209 through 250. Moving on, Appendix H is the next appendix in the waiver renewal application. That kind of covers the topic of quality improvement strategy. So, with anything, we're always trying to improve and ensure that, we're providing the best quality in everything that we do. And this section of the renewal essentially focuses on things like that. And that can be found on pages 209 through 250. I'm sorry, I apologize. I got page 250 through 258. Okay. The next appendix that we come to is Appendix I, and now we start to get into some of the fiscal elements of things. So financial accountability is Appendix I. That essentially includes, audit procedures and things of that nature, and that's found on pages 258 through 290. And the final appendix that we come to is Appendix J, and that's, again, it's more of the fiscal projections. It kind of lays out, the total number of authorized enrollments by service type, things of that nature. That we are anticipating that we might see throughout the next 5 years, and that is found on pages 290 through 313. So now that we've kind of talked about the main body of the application, and we've kind of quickly highlighted the various appendices of the application and sort of the topics that are covered on them, the final piece of the application itself is Addendum A. Addendum A essentially covers the rate methodology language around waiver services. So that the rate methodology language can be found on pages 314 through 381. The methodology, in addition to that, there's some attachments. A lot of them do relate to self-directed services. It's kind of where your personal resource allocation chart and your individual directed goods and services chart can be found. And those attachments to the Addendum A, there's 5 attachments. They can be found on pages 382 to 401. Okay, so before we jump into the portion of the presentation that's going to kind of talk about the changes themselves, let's recap a little bit on what we've talked about. So we've talked a little bit about the renewal. We've kind of talked about where the renewal application can be located. We've talked about the public comment period and how public comments can be submitted to OPWDD. And we've given a little bit of structure around what are the various sections of the renewal application. So hopefully that will make it a little bit easier for folks to find the actual language around the changes that we're going to talk about in a moment. And just another quick note on the changes, we've essentially broken down the changes into 2 types, sort of operational policy type changes and fiscal changes. We've kind of bucketed them a couple of different ways, again, with the hopes that, it'll make things a little easier to follow for all of us as we move through them. And just another quick note before we actually move into the changes themselves, a lot of the changes that we're going to talk about are really pretty minor. It's mostly cleanup and maintenance type changes for this renewal. We're not really proposing a lot of, significant changes to things. So with that being said, let's kind of move forward and take a look at what those changes are. Okay, so the first sort of bucket that we're going to look at are the operational and policy changes. And the first notable change that we come to there is regards to the level of care eligibility determinations, LCEDs for short. And really what this change is it's adding to the existing language the ability for nurse practitioners to sign off on initial and annual LCED redeterminations. So again, we have our existing list in the waiver of who can sign off on those things. We're adding to it here. We're simply adding, an expansion of that to include nurse practitioners. So those changes can be found in Appendix B, and it can be located throughout pages 47 through 49. It's referenced in a couple of places. But that essentially is where that change can be located. So moving on, the next couple of sort of operational and policy changes that you can find in the renewal application are related to self-direction. The first of those changes is with regards to Circle of Support meetings. The current waiver language identifies that Circle of Support meetings are required to be held quarterly. Going forward with the renewal application, we're proposing to make the change to twice a year as opposed to 4 times per year. And that will help us, to be a little more consistent with guidance that we've given over the summer with regards to circle of support meetings. So it's just again, it's kind of a cleanup, kind of a change there. And the wording around that can be located in Appendix E on page 206. So the next sort of change that we're going to find with regards to self-direction is related to the IDGS section with regards to camps. And essentially what this amounts to is a minor technical change that will allow providers to use any certificate. We're making a change on the actual identified wording of the certificate from 7-2 to 7. Again, it's a minor technical change. What we're hoping will allow a little bit greater flexibility with regards to certificates. And that can be located in Addendum A4, which is related to the individual directed goods and services chart. It's actually located in, I think, the third column over, which is the qualifications section of that chart. And that's located on page 388 of the renewal application. Okay. So the next sort of operational policy type change that we come into is with regards to the quality improvement strategy. And again, I mentioned that a little bit earlier when we kind of went through the section. So the quality improvement strategy is found in Appendix H, and it covers pages 250 through 258. And really, again, this is more of that cleanup and maintenance, because if you read through pages 250 through 258 of the renewal, and you compare that to the waiver that's currently in effect, what you're going to see there is it's language changes primarily related to cleanup of work groups and updating of work groups. Some of the work groups from, the last time around are no longer in effect. So it allows us to update the language for the new work groups that OPWD is currently working on. Also, we have a new division. We have the Division of Data Management and Strategy, and that's also identified in Appendix H. So really, for this set of changes that are covering pages 250 through 258 in Appendix H, with regards to the quality improvement strategy, it's really just a maintenance and cleanup type activity. It's really more of a maintenance and cleanup activity, to make things more current and up to date and more reflective of what we actually have in process today. So that covers the operational and program and policy type changes that we're proposing in the waiver renewal. The next section that we're going to cover is going to be the fiscal changes. So at this time, I'd like to turn things over to Donna Cater from the Department of Health, who's going to walk us through our first fiscal update.
Good evening, everyone. So I have a very small fiscal update, and we are making a revision to residential habilitation, day habilitation, and site-based pre-vocational services. In the methodology for the rate-setting methodology for those services, we're going to be updating the agency administration cost and how we review that. And you can find all of the changes to that. We are basically putting in a screen, and you can find all the changes that are necessary in Addendum A. And you can see the pages on your PowerPoint. The pages are 314, 326, 27, 332, 334, 339, 341, and 352 through 353. We aren't changing administration in all of those places, but all of those places is where the definition of administration shows up, so we need to change all those pages. And so really, if you just focus on the first one, you'll see that all of the rest of them are identical in adding a screen to agency administration, and that's the change that we're going to make fiscally. This was also in the New York State 2019-2020 budget as enacted by the legislature. So you can find that we did include an administration change in our methodology there as well.
Okay, thanks, Donna.
Sure.
So now we're going to move forward with just a couple of more fiscal updates. Again, these are related to self-directed services. So the last two fiscal updates we have are, one is with regards to the personal resource account, which is essentially the annual allocation levels for self-directed. And we are making a minor change here. Again, it's more of a cleanup and maintenance type change. We're increasing the PRA values by a little bit to account for the 2018-19 direct care staff salary and minimum wage increases. Those changes can be found in Addendum A3, and that's located on page 387 of the renewal application. The second update that we have for self-direction, again, relates to the IDGS service type, and it's with regards to the clinician and therapy payment levels. And essentially what we're proposing there is, again, it's an increase to the current levels that are identified in the waiver to account for updates that have occurred in the last couple of years. So, based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics values, it's the same methodology that we used before. It's just, increasing them to account for, updates to the values. So those changes can be located in Addendum A4 on page 399 of the renewal application. So those are the changes, which almost brings us to the end of the presentation portion of tonight. So just to recap, we've kind of talked a little bit about the waiver, a little bit about the renewal. We've talked about the public comment periods and how you can submit comments to OPWDD. We've also talked about where the renewal can be located on our website and or at our local regional offices. Additionally, we've kind of walked through kind of the structure of the waiver and also where the specific changes can be found that we've kind of highlighted tonight. Again, most of the changes that we're proposing are very minor. There's really nothing significant or substantive. It's mostly cleanup and maintenance. So, with that being said, again, the PowerPoint that you have looked at tonight is going to be available on our website. The link where that PowerPoint can be found is on your screen on the top half of the slide. And again, if you do have, additional questions, you can contact us through the People First waiver mailbox, and that address is on the lower part of your screen on the current slide. So, with that being said, we're just going to pause here for a couple of minutes to kind of take a quick look at the questions that we've received so far, and then we'll be back to do Q&A. Thank you.
So the first question we have was related to the announcement of this webinar and the availability of a recording. So just so folks know, a letter was sent to from the Commissioner's Office mailbox on Monday announcing the start of the public comment period, the location of the waiver, and the information for this webinar. We did send out a reminder earlier today, but that was our second notice related to this. To make sure people can access this in their leisure, we will not only have the PowerPoint from today's, this evening's session available online. I expect that to be up tomorrow. We will also have a recording of tonight's session, so folks can click on and view the entire presentation, including the audio. It sometimes does take us a little bit longer to get the audio up. We need to get that from an outside source, and it needs to be edited. So it may be as late as Monday for the audio recording, but we'll do our best to get it up tomorrow. So that absolutely will be available to folks who either didn't make it to one of the sessions we had today or are particularly interested in watching it or listening to it again. So that will be available to you. I think a second question we had is a technical one that I can probably answer, and that is, the question was, what is a screen? That is a technical term that people like Donna Cater, who sets rates, use all the time, and that actually means the level at which we will begin to review a particular category. So what she was referencing is that there is a screen, and that means anything below that level will not need to be reviewed by rate setters, and anything above it will. You can think of it as a review limit. That's basically what that term would entail.
We received a question if any of the changes discussed this evening will impact a respite agency.
So that's a good question. There is nothing that we are discussing here that changes respite from the existing and approved discussion. So the rate methodology continues to be described, or the fees, in the Addendum A, and the main language related to the service, which is in Appendix C, is exactly the same as it was in the prior amendment.
We also received a question if we could please review what the waiver application is.
Sure. Okay. So the waiver application is an application that the state must submit to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which we call CMS, and the federal government. And what it allows us to do is it allows us, because this is a renewal application, for another 5 years to support the federal government's participation with New York State in delivering home and community-based services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who want to receive services outside of the institutional setting. So most people who get OPWDD services, many thousands, are enrolled in the HCBS waiver. That's what we're talking about today. And in order to ensure that we have the federal funding to continue to support these important services for people, we have to submit this application. So that's, and when we do that kind of submission, we have to do public comment, and we have to make it available for people to review. So that's why we're here tonight, to sort of provide you with a high-level overview to what is, frankly, a very technical and lengthy document. So the other question that we have relates to upcoming and potential changes in the DSP methodology within rates, and that's not something we can answer now. If we were unable to answer your question, please feel free to email peoplefirstwaiver@opwdd.ny.gov. That's the email address you see on your screen, and we will do our best to connect you to people who can answer your question. So with that, I think we have gone through all the questions that were asked this evening. I want to thank everyone very much for taking time out of your day. We appreciate your participation this evening, and we look forward to receiving comments on the waiver if you do have any. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.